It's a real pleasure to be here in Tokyo, speaking on behalf of the Hirshhorn for the Asia Society Tokyo. I'm here with a group of supporters of the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington and Chicago, and it's been a great delight to be traveling here with them in Japan. We were just previously in Naoshima, and we're so happy because it's meant to be rainy season, but we had fabulous weather. So I've been asked to speak about Japanese art and artist engagement at the Hirshhorn Museum. And I was invited by Thierry Porter, who is a wonderful man who I've known for a long time. And I know of his involvement here in Tokyo. And so it's my great honor to be here. I was thinking a lot about kind of the engagement between the US and Japan, and recalling that when I worked at Asia Society New York at the museum there, we often thought about this important cultural relationship that changed greatly in the 20th century. And I often thought in particular of this Ninseja in the Asia Society collection, which was from the mid-17th century. It's thought to be a great cultural treasure of Japan. And it was John D. Rockefeller III who wanted to acquire it for his collection and sought special permission from the government of Japan to do so because it was a treasure. And in that dialogue between him and the Japanese authorities, in the end, the decision was to allow him to acquire the work and take it to New York. And the thinking was that it was very important for Americans to understand Japanese cultural heritage and the great finesse of the porcelain and ceramic tradition here. And I always think of that act of generosity to allow education, which is really the role of museums within society. And it is also, I think, something that we hold very dearly at the Hirshhorn Museum. Many people wouldn't know this about the Hirshhorn, but in some ways the genesis of the building, which you saw a black and white photo of before, was actually here in Japan. One of the first photos that I encountered when I joined the Hirshhorn was of the Hirshhorn's architect, Gordon Bunshaft, sitting with Isamu Noguchi, looking out to the rock garden at Ryoanji, only a few years before he designed the Hirshhorn Museum. We know from looking at sources of inspiration that Gordon Bunshaft cited that Japanese architecture, and particularly rock gardens, were something that he looked at very carefully when he designed what is known as our brutalist building nearly 50 years ago. So I'm going to show you the image of our building from a very different perspective than you saw before. And this is a very good example of how we think now today about becoming a museum of the 21st century, and that is fully activating our campus, going beyond the gallery walls, and thinking about even the exterior architecture, our round facade, as a screen to project a video artwork, in this case by Doug Aitken. it was an extraordinary moment for the Hirshhorn to have its museum architecture activated and visible from the National Mall. It did have sound and music, and it was fully in motion for the few days that we projected it. But I think it's a very good example of how we think about what it means to be a museum today. And it really is about going beyond the four walls, although the Hirshhorn doesn't really have a square white cube because it's in the round, but really going beyond the walls of the museum. I think a moment in which is so important for us today in our engagement and work with Hiroshi Sugimoto actually started 20 years ago with his full career survey. One of the important moments of that exhibition was that he requested that all of the temporary walls that had been installed within the museum be removed. And so what we were left with was a panoramic view of the round curvature of the building. And it was a revelatory moment for visitors because they could see for the very first time the full scope of the building inside. And it was this series of theatres that he showed alongside his seascapes. These are each long exposure photographs. And so you'll see that the image, the cinematic image, disappears over the long exposure in this example. And the unusual thing about his seascapes was that when he installed them on the curvature of the wall, they actually resembled windows that looked out of the building. Over the past 10 years, we have acquired actively Japanese art of the latter 20th century, including mono-ha artists. You see a good example by Nobuo Sekine, and also High Red Center, that movement that really had a life only of a couple of years, but it was in the 60s, and it was this idea of recording happenings on the street that were anti-establishment and anti-institution. During one of the, I have to tell the story about our project with Yayoi Kusama. So when I was at Asia Society in New York, I always had a dream to do an exhibition of Kusama's infinity mirrored rooms. And when I started at the Hirshhorn in 2014, I went to visit Kusama, and I told her about this idea. And she said to me, I will agree on one condition, and it's that the exhibition tour across America. And if you know anything about museums and touring exhibitions, you know that you don't really control what other museums do. So I said, yes, yes, we will do it. And we approached a number of museums, and we toured this exhibition all across North America. It was, for the Hirshhorn, a game-changing moment. And I hesitate to say that it was also a significant moment in Kusama's, in the understanding of her practice. So prior to our exhibition of Infinity Mirrored Rooms, she had had many retrospectives and surveys, but none of them had focused specifically on her Infinity Mirrored Rooms. They were really very focused on her painting practice of infinity nets that we know that everybody really loves those paintings. And I had always thought that it was her infinity mirrored rooms that allowed us to see her practice to its fullest. Her first work was in 1965, if you can think about that. We acquired that early work from 65, Falley's Field, for the Hirshhorn collection. And we then thought about how to actually develop an art history that allowed us to see her infinity mirrored rooms as part of a main part of her practice rather than a peripheral part of her practice. And so here is an installation chart of that exhibition, which shows the peep show, the mirrored part, but it was really about mapping the genesis of the idea of infinity through her infinity mirrored rooms that began in 1965. And when it happened at the Hirshhorn, I don't think I know that we have never had lines like that to get into our building. They started at 3 a.m. People would start lining up, and then the online ticketing system crashed the Smithsonian servers 3 times. So we were prepared for visitors who loved the work and wanted to see it, but I don't think anybody could have been prepared for what happened. It was a true phenomenon, and it happened at each city that the exhibition traveled to. I wanted to also share some other large-scale installations that we have acquired over the years of my tenure, including this extraordinary Kishio-suga that was presented at the Venice Biennale, of branches that are leaning with stones onto a wall in the vein of Monoha. And also an extraordinary exhibition of Liu Fan's works. We invited him to create a series of new sculptures in response to our building. And I don't think that there's another artist that has done such a sensitive, extraordinary job at thinking about our whole campus on that plaza and unifying it through sculpture. He was also the only other artist to dye our fountain black with black water to create the reflections that you see here. That was another kind of feat for us. So now if I think of a return to Hiroshi Sugimoto, we knew that we wanted to revitalize our lobby. And Sugimoto had begun to do architectural and interior design, and we invited him to interpret our lobby space as a place to welcome our visitors, all 35 million from the National Mall. And he decided to select this 700-year-old nutmeg tree root as the stand for his tables. And it has changed the way our visitors enter the museum. It has created what we call a dwell space, a place where people can sit and enjoy and rest after their visit and before. And so in some ways, this was a proof of concept for his design for our sculpture garden on the National Mall. This is the rendering. So it's the very first time in 3 decades that our sculpture garden has been redesigned. And we gave Sugimoto-san the brief of wanting to provide a greater welcome space from the National Mall, because you can see here that we are the only museum with a presence directly on the National Mall, which welcomes 35 million visitors a year. And so he has created a much more gracious, welcome space, a larger opening, an entrance that is the same grade as the National Mall, so visitors walk straight in. And he also conceived of a garden space, one that shows an avenue of cherry blossoms, and we know that Washington has a whole history of cherry blossoms that are through, garden, public diplomacy. And we are in construction right now as we speak. We have installed the stone walls. We hosted 30 stonemasons from Tokyo to come and build these walls that are a complement to the concrete design of Gordon Bunshaft. And it is this idea of the past and present, of cultural histories that Sugimoto really brings to this project. We have also included a number of Japanese artists, and this is a work by Izumi Kato that was just installed 2 weeks ago. And you'll see the interaction between Sugimoto's walls and also his own sculpture here by Kato. And then this is a rendering. You will see Yoshitomo Nara is inaugurating a very special space in the sculpture garden, and it will be a changing space. So when we thought about the idea of how to create a sculpture garden that reflected all of what we did inside the museum, we knew that the sculpture garden also had to allow for temporary exhibitions. And so Yoshitomo Nara is the first artist to have created sculptures for that space that we're calling the West Garden space. So that is my final image, just a little snapshot of some of the work that we've been doing with Japanese artists, but I think it should show you that we have a great commitment at the Hirshhorn to the idea of international art, and Japanese artists feature strongly within that. We will open our sculpture garden at the end of October, and we cannot wait to show you. It has been a decade-long project. Sugimoto has been enormously patient with all of the design and government authority approvals that we needed to make because of the location on the National Mall. But we believe that it will be the most welcoming, beautiful space for the interpretation and encounter with art, architecture, and of course, gardens. Thank you very much.